If there's ever been an argument against my masculinity, it's that I don't care in any way about sports or cars. I can't tell you a single thing about them. The last time I even cared about the Olympics for the sports was when they were here in Canada, in Vancouver. What was that, 2010? So when it turned out that the FIFA World Cup was on right now in Qatar, I really didn't care. In fact, I think this is the first time I'd ever heard about FIFA outside of the context of a video game. But because it's 2022 and this is the internet, the FIFA World Cup shit show has become an absolute salt mine. Let's get into why. Qatar is this tiny peninsula in the Middle East, and like every other Middle Eastern country, the West knows it exists because of gas and oil. Qatar, Bahrain, and the United Arab Emirates all share a common history as former British colonies, and when the British were pulling out, the three discussed unifying as one nation, but negotiations broke down and they all ended up remaining separate. Qatar's economics are similar to its neighbors. All the countries in the region really only have two things, energy and sand, so they've all become massive export economies. They sell their fuel to the rest of the world and import anything they need with their fat stacks of cash. And they don't actually need to import too much. There's only 350,000 ethnic Qataris, though I guess it's not that simple. Qatar's population is currently sitting at nearly 2.9 million. Check out Qatar's demographics. It's got the most lopsided population by gender on the planet. Why? Because of migrant workers. I know a lot of rightoids are complaining about immigration to the first world right now, but hey, at least you're not 12% of the population in your own homeland, which is what the Qataris are right now. Why is this happening? Well, pretty much all of those Qataris are rich. Qatari is the richest ethnicity in the world per capita, regardless of what Kanye West might say about other groups right now. No Qatari in Qatar actually does menial labor. They just import workers from other countries, enticing them with oil money to build their massive skyscrapers and stadiums. 95% of Qatar's workforce is non-Qatari, and working conditions for these people have been described by outside sources as ranging between heavily exploited labor to outright slavery. The reason Qatar is working on all of these mega projects is because they saw what Dubai did for the UAE, and they want a slice of that pie. The tourism, the prestige. Dubai turned the UAE from a country nobody ever heard of before to a place everyone wanted to visit. The FIFA World Cup is just the next step in the projection of Qatari culture and influence. But there's one thing everybody forgets about Qatar, and about the UAE too. Despite how modern and Western looking their new projects are, they're still Muslim countries. They're not outright Islamic states, but they do have a lot of Sharia law on the books. It's this culture shock that turned the FIFA World Cup into an absolute shit show on the internet, as Western soccer fans flocked to the country in droves to see the game for themselves. This viral post probably encapsulates the whole thing best. Security guard is refusing to let me into the stadium for USA Wales. You have to change your shirt, it's not allowed. Yeah, dude, you're wearing a pride shirt in a Muslim country. You're not in the tolerant West, where your average Joe doesn't give a shit about anyone's sexuality one way or another, and where screeching LGBT activists are stupidly tolerated because nobody wants to lose their job over being called homophobic on Twitter. You are in an explicitly illiberal country. They don't share your values, and to them what you're doing is just as immoral as the God hates fags people are to you. They're treating you exactly like you'd treat them if it were reversed. In fact, you should probably be thankful they decided not to throw you off a rooftop. And Qataris online said basically the same thing in response. As a Qatari, I'm proud of what happened. I don't know when will the Westerners realize that their values aren't universal. There are other cultures with different values that should be equally respected. Let's not forget that the West is not the spokesperson for humanity. Any leftist who's ever talked about diversity and the rich culture of the global South and other nonsense has just had the natural end result of their own logic boomerang right back into their stupid faces. The left has never actually valued diversity or other cultures. The left's entire shtick is adherence to a mono-ethic. They might want different colored faces represented as the spokespeople for that mono-ethic, but they want exactly the same thoughts going through the brains behind those faces. And this is where we get to the core of this conversation, leftist presuppositions. Get a load of these replies. You must realize that there will come a time when you have to move on from your values from the Middle Ages. It's the 21st century. Basic human rights aren't the values of the West, they're the values of human beings with empathy, something you clearly lack. This passage presupposes that while the left is tolerant of other cultures, that tolerance comes with a timer attached. These other cultures are expected to eventually grow up and conform to leftist morals. In other words, abandon what makes them different from us. Human rights aren't just a difference of opinion. The presupposition this time is that the leftist claims to have discovered, as if it were a matter of science, the objective, the real human rights. But what a right is a matter of philosophy, not science. Science can tell us what the world is, but it can't tell us what to value. A philosophy that doesn't value the lives of gay people would not care about a leftoid whining about universal human rights. They already exist outside of the left-wing framework. This is disgusting. Why do Muslims expect people to respect their culture when their culture is fueled by misogyny and homophobia? I will not respect any culture that does not support basic human rights. Here's the real funny bit. If we're just going off of how humans view the world, gay rights and women's rights aren't really basic human rights. Most humans on this planet disagree with the leftist view of those topics. And certainly, there's no more objective morality to appeal to here. There's no word of God anymore. The Enlightenment's taken care of that. How can you possibly describe your own personal moral view as basic human rights if there's no God to objectively proclaim them as such, and subjectively, most people on the planet reject your view? Seriously, how does this statement make any sense? Western values may not be universal, but human rights are. What makes them universal? The Christian answer was God, and that answer compelled Christians to convert non-believers. But the people making these comments are overwhelmingly atheists. Is it the state? Is the state the source of morality? Well, the Qatari state disagrees with you. So it seems like as long as you're in Qatar, you're incorrect. Are you going to try to appeal to some common humanity? Who's to say your interpretation of what common humanity is correct? Why isn't theirs correct? Are you going to appeal to consequences or to harm? That still presupposes what consequences you value first. For example, a consequentialist Muslim will still oppress gay people as he views the gays getting oppressed as a morally good consequence of his actions. A lot of people lean on Karl Popper's paradox of tolerance from his book The Open Society and Its Enemies to talk about this problem, usually by posting this comic on social media, which is actually a misformulation of the original point, but that mistake doesn't matter for this talk. At the core of it, a lot of liberals and socialists both make the same assumption that their morality is superior, specifically because it strives to be universal. That's the tolerance that Popper was talking about. In terms of this specific topic, Qatari culture is intolerant of gay people, therefore it must aggressively infringe upon them for simply existing, while Western culture is not intolerant of gay people. They are left alone unless they commit a crime. And like we saw in the last video, some really stupid progressives want gay people to be left alone even if they do commit crimes, simply because they're gay. Both liberals and socialists will say, look, we're not being aggressive, we're being tolerant. A Muslim can exist in our society as long as he keeps his bigotry to himself. But we cannot exist in a Muslim society because, unlike us in the enlightened West, the Muslim must aggressively enforce his morality upon others. But we aren't aggressive, we only act in self-defense. And most people see this difference and nod sagely, having figured it all out. But that's actually not the end of the conversation. Destiny debated an Islamist like a year ago or something, and they had a very interesting exchange at one point. Destiny said that Islam must oppress those who refuse to follow Sharia, like, for example, liberals. The Islamist said that liberalism must oppress people who try to implement Sharia on humanity, like he does. Destiny's reply was, I'm oppressing you because I won't let you oppress others? And the Islamist's response was, in not quite these words admittedly, but I understood the point. Yes, we both have a moral system that aims to be universal, applying to all of humanity whether or not they want to be a part of it. And this does seem to be true. The Islamist wants to force Sharia down everyone's throats, to enforce their moral prescriptions on all. But at the same time, the liberal also wants to force tolerance down everyone's throats, to prevent people from making moral prescriptions. The claim is that the liberal is tolerant, while the Islamist is not, is true, but that claim only has moral weight if you adopt the presupposition that tolerance is good. An Islamist doesn't value tolerance, and so to him, the liberal must oppress him with liberal values, just as much as he would oppress the liberal with Sharia values. This logic also works with socialists too. They just have equality as their oppressive value, rather than tolerance. But at the end of the day, all political groups necessarily must make others conform to their rules. So, we are now at a crossroads. My good friend Lilith Lovett posted stuff like this on Twitter, condemning the events in Qatar as immoral. But where does that logic take us? If we truly are inclusive and diverse and tolerant, then we must adopt a live and let live attitude towards the rest of the world. We have given up the idea of Europe operating world empires, coming to view it as an evil, a colonial system designed to subjugate other peoples and cultures. But without that system, those barbarians that we once subjugated have returned to their barbarian ways. When Qatar was freed from Western colonial imperial influence, that also meant freeing them from Western moral standards. True inclusivity and diversity means that Qatar oppresses its gay and trans population because as the flawed, broken, capitalist, formerly oppressive West, we don't have any moral high ground. But you know what? Maybe we do. What if we did have the moral high ground? Then we could object to Qatar's behaviors. We could say, our morals are just better than yours, and we will judge you by a standard that we have imposed upon you. But that means imposing it, doesn't it? That means empire and colonialism again. If not politically, then certainly culturally. It means admitting that the West is not in fact the great capitalist Satan currently raping and pillaging the planet that we should all be ashamed of for our ancestors partaking in it. But instead, the West is the greatest civilization to ever exist, our heritage given to us by those ancestors, a philosophical marvel the likes of which our planet has never before seen. But that view means that the Western world is morally superior to places like Qatar, and that is a sentence that gets caught in the throat of a lot of leftists. They would rather appeal to the nebulous idea of human rights, hand-waving them as objective when they're also just another presupposition of their own culture. And they unknowingly end up swinging around the same bludgeon that Christians used against non-believers centuries ago. That is the dilemma we face. Either all cultures are beautiful, diversity is our strength, and therefore the West has no moral prescriptions to make against the cultures that empire once called barbaric. Or our morals are correct. They are worth fighting for, and we should stand up for people who find themselves under the boot of the barbarians. But that means admitting that they are, in fact, barbarians. The left wants to have its cake and eat it too. They're not prepared to actually tackle this idea beyond virtue signaling. Personally, I understand the logic of both. They're not without merit. But at the end of the day, though I have many conservative tendencies, especially in my personal life, I'm still a liberal. I am prepared to commit to my moral prejudices, even as I admit them to be prejudices, and not any sort of objective morality. I'm not here claiming to adhere to some perfect good, and I don't believe Qatari culture to be some unrepentant evil. I won't make the claim to you that I've solved morality the way that leftists believe that they have. I simply know what my gut tells me. And it tells me that how the Qataris treat gay people is wrong. I don't need to rely on leftist presuppositions to get here in some calculated, reasoned manner. My intuition is enough.